Welcome to Redirect, Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined by my co-host, Matthew Archambault.
Here I am.
How are you?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird time. It's been weird like the last 4 years, and you're always tempted to think, oh wait, it's just more weird now. But with all this whole like election thing and all these lawsuits and all this just insane talk, honestly, it might have me a little bit on edge. So that's how I am. How are you?
This morning on the local talk radio, my favorite lead-in.
Honestly, like, probably for your mental health, you probably need to stop.
It's so good, though. I can't quit. It's so good. One of the hosts made a point that, like, everything is political. Why? Oh, the left is saying that this lawsuit is political. Of course, everything is political, which is, like, on the one hand, kind of a good point. Like, in some ways, impeachment was obviously political by its very nature. Benghazi was political. All these things are political, but this is like to overturn the election. That's different.
Well, I can't wrap my head around is the thought process that there is no conceivable way Joe Biden could have won the election. Like, it's just such gaslighting. I mean, Donald Trump never reached 50% approval rating. And for most of the time, he was stuck in the low 40s. And you look at with COVID, the economy.
Huge rallies.
It's just like you look at everything and you go, how in the hell could he win? How could Trump win? But now they're like, it's inconceivable that he would have lost. It's like, how is it inconceivable? I mean, if Trump won, I don't think anyone would have said it's inconceivable that he won, right? He would say, like, yeah, we understand that could have happened. I mean, it's all a grift. And I think anyone with half a brain understands it's just a grift by Trump. But it just seems like just the times are uneasy.
Right.
Because you just feel like something bad is going to happen. And I just cannot wait for this year to end. Even if 2021, January 1st still sucks, it just won't be 2020.
I mean, it's going to, right? I mean, there's no reason to think that, like, events care what month it is. Oh, guys, some terrible thing was going to happen, but we can't anymore because we're in a different calendar year. Well, first of all, like, it's unnerving to think about how few people would need to be convinced for the election to actually be stolen. It's not that many people, electors, maybe a couple governors, folks like that. And then you would have an election that, like, actually goes to Trump because our system is so screwy. And it would be.
Or imagine if Georgia was a deciding state, right?
Right.
And I think Brian Kemp, who I don't have a real high opinion of, but at least he's been holding the line there. And I think one thing that can allow him in his little world to hold the line against Trump is that, Georgia does not really matter. But imagine if it did, how much pressure it would be on him. Would he withstand that pressure? And also, it would be a lot easier to perhaps get the Supreme Court to get involved in some way. I think the Texas case, that's in the Supreme Court now, which probably my prediction is by the time people listen to this podcast will have already been dismissed. But something like that could have had a lot better chance.
I do think it's illustrative to listen to right-wing talk radio because in my mind and in my media exposure and everything, Joe Biden was this sort of like vanilla, boring choice, right? An institutionalist, somebody who's been around forever, very centristy, kind of goes with the flow of the party.
You're so naive, Stephen.
And then you listen to right-wing talk radio, and one guy was saying yesterday, we're going to have a dictatorship within 20 years. I mean, they're really hyped up about this. And now, to be clear, I mean, Obama was going to be the Muslim socialist antichrist or whatever. And he wasn't. And that was the end of that. I am worried about this combination of people who believe these insane things who also believe that they've been robbed. Like, there wasn't this narrative with Obama that like he's the Antichrist and the election was literally stolen from him. Or I mean, he literally stole the election. And there obviously wasn't the same kind of passion for John McCain. So we just had the belief that he was the Antichrist. And now we've got this sort of three-headed monster of a president like Trump who really inspires people, weirdly. People thinking that Joe Biden, I guess it's like Joe Biden plus AOC, are going to usher in an era of dictatorship, and the belief that Joe Biden's presidency is illegitimate. I guess the birther thing was like that though too, right?
Yeah, but not to...
I just talked myself out of my argument.
But not to this extent, right? I mean, the birther thing had, a real following, but nothing like this. I'm just really afraid people are going to get hurt, and it's just really, I don't know, it's really strange. Yeah,
I'm worried about acts of violence. To me, it just seems like a matter of time. I mean, those people got caught planning the kidnapping of the governor of Michigan, and Trump was like, well, yeah. He basically said...
Yeah, she kind of deserved it.
She kind of deserved it. She kind of had it coming. And like, if I'm in those circles, all the little messages that have been sent, you're planning for something and you're making plans for sure, I would think. But anyhow, Matthew, we've got an excellent show. Hassan Ahmad, friend of the show, he's going to come on. We're going to talk about, what are we talking about this week? Stuff?
Just talking about stuff, really about, there are a lot of changes in immigration law that have just happened and which are going to happen shortly before Trump leaves office. So there's a lot of uncertainty around. DACA is still with us, which is kind of amazing. We talk a little bit about that. And just maybe the general angst, though Hassan is a lot more optimistic than perhaps we are. So it might be a good little break for people. He has some radical ideas, though, about not listening to white supremacists any longer.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
He's really out there with some of his thinking. It's pretty bold.
Pretty bold. Yeah.
Look, you got to keep a little optimism in your heart, I think, or else it'll do the Grinch thing, right? 3 sizes too small or whatever. Although if you have a heart that's too big, that's technically a medical issue. So
yeah, you
got to be careful with your heart. But totally forgot what I was going to say. Lost my train of thought.
Well, Hassan's a great lawyer. You follow him on Twitter. He's a really good follow. A lot of good information he tweets out there. And he's an excellent attorney. So if you're in the Virginia area, you always look him up. I refer clients to him because I know he's one of the best. So it's a privilege to have him on.
Right. And he I guess we should give this background because we do address it at the beginning of the show. Yeah. When we had Alyssa Milano on, who is probably the most famous person we've had on, we've also had on Erwin Chemerinsky. So I think it's kind of a tie between those two, but he's the one that set up that interview. Those are the circles he runs in. So not only is he a good lawyer, but
now,
he's
if
big
you
time.
want him to set up interviews for you, maybe it's probably best if he kind of coaches the people that he sets up interviews on how to best promote the thing that they're on.
Right. Now,
so,
by way of background, for all our new listeners, Matthew's still salty because...
so are you.
Just you. I'm not salty. Not at all. I'm not bitter at all. I did garage sale all my copies of Who's the Boss DVDs, but Matthew's salty because Alyssa Milano was on the show, had a good little interview, and then she didn't promote it at all. She didn't tweet it, talk about it. It's no surprise she came on this show. She was doing like all the shows at that time and had no problem promoting all the other shows.
Maybe I should just go with that. She was just so busy. It's just something. It just slipped through the cracks.
I'm starting to sound like Trump. I realize. We have her on. She comes on the show. Beautiful interview. Perfect. Some would say it was a perfect interview.
This is the worst Trump impersonation you've done.
And then
usually much better.
It was kind of weird, right? Should I start over?
Yeah.
And then nothing. No tweets. She doesn't say anything about it. She's doing all the other shows. She's talking about the other shows. Anyways, it's very Trumpy to just years later be complaining about somebody who didn't even think of, the crime is that like she didn't think about us enough, I guess. Anyways, so we will address Alyssa Milano Gate at the start of the interview with Hassan.
All right, let's go team.
Go team.
What's up?
Hey, Matthew. What's going on, man?
Not much. How you doing?
Good. It's been a while. I think it had been a while. I had texted you, I think, about some issue in Philly or something like that. Oh, I tried to send you a Nats case, and you're like, you don't like naturalization.
I hate Nats cases. Unless there's something
Nats
really...
cases, man. Come on.
Oh, man, I do. Unless there's something weird about them. I don't know. I never feel like you should charge that much, and quite frankly, I don't feel like doing it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a big fan of most cases right about now, so...
Yeah.
That's
really
that's
like clients and law stuff.
Yeah.
Work. Because my assistant tested positive for COVID, so I went into quarantine while I was waiting to get my test and all that. So I'm like feeling bad. I'm feeling like everything, like, oh, my body's aching. I'm just tired. I really can't do much. And I go and I take the test and I'm negative. And I realize I'm just lazy. It might be been diagnosed with being lazy. So there's that.
You do suffer from old age.
Yeah, that too.
That's what the doctor said. Now, I want to make sure I get the pronunciation right again.
It's Matthew or Matt. Either way.
Hassan, right? Hassan.
Yeah, Hassan.
And Ahmad.
Ahmad, yeah. I'm Ahmad. Technically, the emphasis is on the first syllable.
Ahmad. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not Ahmad Rashad.
Not as
Ahmad Rashad.
It's an acceptable pronunciation. It's an acceptable pronunciation.
What's the worst thing a white person could do to your name?
Ahmad.
Let's see.
The whole thing.
You know what? It was a nickname of mine in middle school, and I'm going to regret telling you this.
Oh boy.
They would drop the H and just call me Hassan.
Of course they did.
Genius.
Yeah. It's such a middle school thing to do. It happened a few times afterward too, because some people don't outgrow middle school. But
Sure.
Yeah. But it's also common for my name to be spelled with one S. And I actually complained to my mom about it. And I said, "Why did you put two S's in my name? Now I have an ass in the middle of my name." Well, I didn't say ass, but I said that there's a dirty word in my name, and she just kind of ignored me and didn't say anything.
So do you get any like DHS attorneys calling you Hassan?
That hasn't happened. Not in front of my face anyway.
Yeah, because they do. A lot of them have the mentality of honestly, we kind of all have that mentality. That's what Steven's been calling me for years. On your back, so.
I just call Matthew an ass, and it's not even in his name.
Right. That's true. Right.
So, Hassan, we haven't talked to you in a while, and we just wanted to have you on because Alyssa Milano has stopped returning our calls. I've been texting. I don't feel like it's too much, maybe a couple times a night. And, she's not responding. And we just wanted to know, I
flew to LA and knocked on her window.
Yeah. So, what's up? Why is she being so weird?
What can I say? She's a busy woman,
Okay.
But, well, to be honest, I know that right now she's been super focused on Georgia, and every time that I've talked to her, she really is amazing. So
let me ask you this, because there's a lot of people, especially on the angsty left Twitter, who end up giving her a lot of flack because they don't think she's woke enough, I guess, or she's, whatever, too vanilla of a Democrat for their taste. Do people like that, the celebrities who get involved, do they hear those kinds of things? And does it seems like it would be really discouraging to be out there dedicating real time and effort and just to be constantly lectured.
I think she's got pretty thick skin. She's when you're causing waves and trying to talk about going back to some form of normal and decent and talking about compassion, there's going to be disagreement on all sides. She gets a lot of death threats from the right. So I think in comparison, the jabs that come from the left are probably not as big of a deal for her.
Right.
Well, I think the biggest criticism of her from the left was that she didn't promote our podcast when she was on it.
Right.
I think that's what Stephen, is that what you're seeing on your Twitter feed?
Yeah, a lot of people are like, why didn't you stand for Bernie or the Redirect podcast? And, good points on both accounts. But we didn't really want to have you on to talk about that. What's been going on? I mean, how are things?
I mean, you have a blue check now.
Yeah, I don't know how I got that. I don't know what happened, why they saw fit to give me a blue check mark. But anyway, it's been an eventful year, obviously, for all of us, and trying to keep up with the changes. Steve and I were just talking a few minutes ago about ultimately we feel blessed that we're able to continue serving the communities that we serve and able to keep the doors open and be able to adapt, and there's been a lot of changes. I've got 3 children, and having them home all the time and doing distance education, it's rough. I mean, it's a defining moment for their entire generation. They're going to remember this. It has a lot greater impact on kids than it does on, people like us, and perhaps even less impact on really old people like Matthew.
Exactly.
We've been able to serve. We've been able to do things. We've been able to keep the fight alive, and it worked, because hopefully there'll be some brighter things on the horizon come January. So
now, Hassan, you're smarter than me and Stephen. Are you able to keep track of all the changes that have just currently happened and are about to happen?
In the last half an hour.
Yeah, because I go on Twitter
that's not true. It's not true at all.
It.
No, it's not true.
But I mean, for immigration practitioners out there, in just the last, it seems like, week or so, there's so much going on, and then all these like new regulations are going to be coming into effect, these new procedures with the immigration courts. It's quite frankly a little overwhelming, and I really just want to just kind of put my head down and really not pay attention and just hope it all goes away. That a good strategy?
I think that all of us want that. That's the unspoken truth. That's what we're hoping for, that someone's going to challenge it, and we're so close to January 20th. As before, the policies tended to come out, about Friday at 4 p.m. or 4:30 p.m.,
right
Friday.
After we record the podcast, actually, is typically when there's news breaking.
There you go. So it was kind of like clockwork, but now I guess they realized they had so many other nasty things they wanted to push through, and there's only, 4 Fridays left? So now it's coming out rapid fire.
Yeah. So look, the show always ages out by the next day because there are things like this. And there were some new regulations published today on the immigration court. And I haven't had time to even read them. Have you read them?
No, I haven't. I did hear about it. I saw a byline. I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Yeah. So everything is terrible.
Yeah,
hopefully
that's all you need to know.
Yeah.
Just a few highlights from what I see. They've eliminated administrative closure, which is the ability to take a case in immigration court and removal proceedings and basically shelf it. Normally that's done, if there's somebody who doesn't have particularly strong relief, but there's a humanitarian reason to allow them to remain in the country, or if they have like a green card application or some sort of visa application with some other part of the government, the immigration court, through administrative closure, can pause their removal case and allow the adjudication of their relief. And now they're saying, that's no longer a thing. We've got to move forward with removal 100% in all cases, no matter what. So that's a new one from today. That's pretty cool, right, guys?
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Yeah. It's great how they've been able to reprogram the entire immigration machine into a deportation machine and take all the immigration part out of it.
I had a hearing this week. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm the only one who won cancellation this week, did you guys do that too? Or just me?
No.
Okay.
No.
Good for you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Bravo.
So in some thank you, Matthew. Very enthusiastic.
It had nothing to do with the clients and their situation and all that. It was all you.
It was all me.
Yeah.
So anyhow, some people in removal proceedings can qualify to stay and actually win their green card in proceedings. And, we need to show all kinds of things. And I had a really strong case, and I'd reached out to DHS beforehand, the ICE attorney, and said hey, why don't you stipulate? why don't you agree to relief and let's get in and out, right? And they're not allowed to anymore. So, they still say that, well, I've looked it over. I don't think I can do that. But as a rule, they're not allowed to.
Right.
And then what's worse is, some of the questions on cross-examination were, I think, legitimate, and, trying to sort out the facts can be a messy business. But a lot of it was just kind of nonsensical. Like, why don't you have this document? Why don't you have these records? And some other stuff. And then in the end, he agrees that we've met our burden and that, relief is appropriate. So there was this big, long cross-examination by an aggressive prosecutor who, later says, well, yeah, it's whatever. You're good. Yeah. And it's like, what are we doing? Like, what is the point of all of this? But you're right. I mean, they've taken these prosecutors and said, you can only have one posture, like no matter what the facts, even if the facts are overwhelmingly in favor of the immigrant and the burden has clearly been met, you've got to put on this show. It's absurd.
Right. And then they complain about the system being overtaxed and overburdened and backlogged and whatnot. And the response to that is, hey, let's pump more cases into it and slow them down and then take these heavy-handed positions of just saying no to everything and take away every single docket control tool that immigration judges have to slow it down. I mean, it really is mad. But that's what happens. That's what I mean when I say it's been reprogrammed.
Right.
If it actually was an immigration court, and if the judges had true independent judicial, authority, they'd be able to control these things and be able to make the adjustments where necessary and say, we don't need a trial. The evidence is good here. There's, the players can work together and play together nicely. But they've made it so unnecessarily adversarial, and it continues to tax that system. So,
well, also, I mean, we have the zero-sum game of the court, right? So, like, you walk in to an individual hearing, and there are two outcomes for the most part, right?
Right.
Either removal order or relief, right? Either asylum or permanent residence or something else. And like no other type of imaginative things, are even able to be offered like they are in a criminal context. Like, you are eligible for permanent residency through cancellation, but we're a little concerned with some of this negative history. How about you have like some probationary period,
right?
And then if everything's okay, then you get your, something like that, something that you could work with to keep you from having to go through with this like 3-hour individual hearing where you have the trial attorney either probing on relevant questions or, and usually in my cases, simply reframing questions I asked on direct as cross examination, like,
yeah.
So you were arrested for DUI, weren't you? It's like, yeah, we already went through that. We know that. Like, why don't you get to the point? But, you end up doing that, and for what? And it is disheartening, but sometimes I will sit around and shudder when I look at all these new changes that are coming about, like one we just talked about with the courts, which will likely be challenged. I don't think you can regulate out administrative closure, right? So that's going to be challenged, and it's going to get tied up in court. January 20th is going to come along, and hopefully they just kind of shuttle that and all that. But imagine if Trump won,
right?
I mean, I honestly don't know if I could continue to practice. It's too much. And maybe we're going to be putting a lot on Biden, but they really have to come through and kind of reverse these.
Well, I'm looking forward to putting a lot on Biden, honestly. I mean, this is the time. The most important thing from my perspective is that it has to be more than just a Control-Z and undo everything. We have to actually use executive power. There's one lesson we've seen is that how susceptible our entire system, I mean, DHS and DOJ and EOR, everybody, susceptible to executive orders and how much it can be manipulated by executive order without Congress or ostensibly without the will of the American people. So if it can go one way, it can go the other way too. And I think it's, while it's important to focus on, of course, legislative reforms and legislative fixes, right? That executive power needs to be used to not only undo, but push it forward the other way as well.
I've been thinking a lot about this client who is on a stay of removal, and she ended up with a removal order like 20 years ago because of notary fraud, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And, she gets this removal order totally unbeknownst to her. ICE shows up at her door in like 2011 to execute the removal order. And she ends up filing a stay and it gets granted. And then they also put her husband in removal proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
Local ICE's agreement was, well, you can stay as long as your husband is in proceedings. Well, his proceedings were administratively closed. And so this sort of agreement during the Obama administration between, us and the local ICE officers was that, she could stay.
Mm-hmm.
And then Trump comes in and completely undoes all of those types of agreements. And suddenly for 4 years, she's at risk at any moment of being removed. And luckily, the stays either have taken so long to adjudicate or have been decided in her favor. She hasn't been actually removed, but she's lived in 4 years of this sort of, I don't think I can really begin to understand the stress of that and the uncertainty. And now, maybe she enters back into some sort of like still stressful, but less so situation with the possibility that in another 4 years, it goes the other way. And so I agree with you that the exercise of executive power needs to be bold and aggressive in a way that maybe we've never seen from the left. But I also don't think we should give up on legislative fixes for these types of people who are, and there's, thousands or millions of people in similar situations. So I'm wondering, do you guys know about any, because we've been getting this question, people who listen to the show who want to advocate for something, they want to be able to call their representative or, somebody from the incoming Biden administration and say, we want this thing to happen. And is there anything in the works or anything that people can throw their weight behind already?
Well, a big part of that is going to depend, obviously, on what happens in Georgia and whether the Democrats take the Senate. The DREAM Act and the Promise Act, definitely a possibility. Obviously, if the Senate...
What's the Promise Act?
It's HR 6. It passed in the House, and the issue is getting in the Senate. HR 6 from 2019 cancels and prohibits removal proceedings against certain non-citizens, providing them with a path towards permanent resident status. I mean, it's a...
Wow.
I'm not going to call it comprehensive immigration reform, but...
pretty good, though. Sounds like.
Pretty good. Yeah. There's the Promise Act, and it passed the House back in June of last year. And of course, has now gone into the McConnell graveyard.
But even if the Democrats win in Georgia, don't you think a lot of this is still going to have trouble because you're going to have those Democrats like Joe Manchin and all those types who could potentially like stand in the way?
All I'm saying is that at least there's a path. At least there's a path. At least there's something. Because if McConnell remains the majority leader, then the best I think we can hope for is to focus on some of the not so crazy, Republican Lindsey
building
Graham.
A shorter wall.
Building a shorter wall. I hope hope it's not that much of a crappy deal. But the Lindsey Graham's Bridge Act, so some of the organizations that I've been in touch with are sort of gearing up for building a coalition between Lindsey Graham and some of the other folks on the right-hand side, the center right, I guess, just to be able to get just enough to pass something like that. Now, obviously, it's not going to look the same as...
When did Lindsey Graham propose the Bridge Act? Because
that was back in 2017, along with Graham, along with Durbin, back in 2017. And from what I've heard is that there's some version of it that may be possible because, Lindsey Graham spent the better part of the last 4 years towing the Trump line, but now everybody's trying to drop him like a hot potato. So, well, not everybody. Some people are. Some people are. Some people are. And
it's two people. It's Mitt Romney and his wife.
All the people that are not going to be in Congress next year, plus Mitt Romney.
Yeah, well, I think that there's at least and maybe I'm optimistic, maybe naively optimistic, but I'm hoping that talking to and building this coalition of the willing, it's not going to look great, but it is a path forward. So
let me ask you this. This is what Democrats traditionally like to do. They say, all right, first we're going to deport a bunch of people to prove to you that we're tough. Then we're going to come to the table with the thing that you want as our starting position, and then we'll negotiate backwards from there. And so I think they're bad at politics is what I'm trying to say oftentimes. But the reality is, if we're going to be realistic about this, is that something big like immigration reform is likely going to require some type of compromise, or at least a willingness to not get everything that you want. But I'm wondering, like, as lawyers and as activists and people who care about this, like, where is that line? Where do you walk away from the table? And what are the things that we should just not be willing to settle for?
I look at it as you just don't walk away from the table. You get, and then you keep pushing and you just keep pushing, and then you sit down at a different table and you keep pushing. I think the victory is in the effort itself, and whatever you get along the way is gravy. That's kind of been the way I've been approaching it, because you don't want to say that it's a done deal. You want to continue moving forward. You want to continue pushing for more due process and pushing for a law that actually, like the Bridge Act, we're talking about a relatively streamlined path to citizenship for existing DACA holders, but it's probably not going to be possible to get something for their parent, in terms of TPS adjustments, that also may be doable, but in response, they're going to want something, as the anti-immigrant movement likes to say, put the T back in TPS. And
temporary.
Yeah, they're going to want to see some sort of change. And this is where, the framing and the advocacy that they've done for years, talking about how there's nothing temporary about TPS, and it just turns into a backdoor green card. Well, that's how they characterize Arabelli adjustments for people that leave and come back on advanced parole and are able to adjust their status, many of whom had TPS and get the advanced parole based on TPS. So that's going to be something as well. But it underscores a larger problem, how we need to reframe the immigration debate outside of the anti-immigrant movement's framing, so that we don't have to deal with these types of quandaries,
Right.
Why shouldn't TPS naturally lead to permanent residence? Why not? People come here, they set down roots, they weren't able to leave. Now they've acclimated, they've had children here, they pay taxes, they do all these things and contribute. What sense does it make to send them back?
Right.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point. Biden said something at one of the debates, which kind of went unnoticed, I thought, for the most part, but he's talking about dreamers, and he said that we're indebted to them. Like, we owe them this. He framed it as a debt that we have to them. And, normally it's like, oh, we got to do this nice thing for these poor people.
Right.
And his framing, I thought, was really effective and true, that these aren't people who need a handout or an act of charity. These are people who've fought and sacrificed for our country and paid taxes, and all the while being denied really basic rights and dignity, and we're indebted to them. So I think the reframing is important.
No, I just want to know, Hassan, what your feelings about like the appointment for DHS Alexander Mayorkas.
Alexander Mayorkas.
Do you have any strong feelings on that?
Honestly, at this point, based on the game of musical chairs that we've had to play for the last 4 years and never knowing who's heading what agency and having illegal appointments and nobody confirmed by the Senate and all this craziness, I'll take him. I don't have super strong feelings one way or the other. I'm most looking forward to having stable leadership whose feet you can actually hold to the fire. And I don't make too much of the fact, I know his background, I know where he comes from, the fact that he's an immigrant, all those things are great on paper, but it remains to be seen what that actually will mean in practice. Now's the time for the real work to begin. So that's how I'm looking at it.
Who do you think should be Joe Biden's Stephen Miller? Should there be an equivalent there? I mean, it could be you, right?
I was going to say you, Matthew.
Oh, I would never pass any sort of background check that would be necessary.
They're both
for that.
bald and kind of hard to look at. So
yeah, well, there you go.
I mean, you're halfway there.
But I've seen some of the names on the transition team. It's certainly encouraging. I think it's important to actually get more practitioners, people that actually know what it's like to practice in this system over a number of years and the real needs of clients. I've spent the last 4 years of my time, most of my advocacy, trying to tell these stories, keeping one foot in the trenches and one foot in policy circles, which is hard in terms of managing both sides. It's like two different sides of your brain. But every time I'm either in Richmond or on Capitol Hill, the stories that have moved members of Congress and their staffers the most are just random off the wall stories I tell about what happened in court that morning or last week, stories from a client that I had 5 years ago or even 10 years ago.
Well, I do feel that Biden should have an advantage over the Trump administration in that I believe that the people on our side are much better versed in immigration law and procedure than those that are on the anti-immigration side. And I think that it played itself out over the 4 years with all the court wins that our side has gotten, how much we had to stop. Look, I mean, who would have thought that we'd be doing this show on December 11th, 2020, and still be talking about DACA being available, right?
That's true. I think it's a really powerful point.
If we had said that in this time in 2016, we'd be like, there's no way. I mean, DACA is going to be gone. But because
they tried very hard.
They tried, but
right.
The point's even stronger that they tried, right?
Right.
They did not have the knowledge and expertise to get these things done. I mean, they're getting into speed now. They're really kind of in the groove now, which is why it's so good that Biden won.
Right. No, it almost became just sort of a pattern, like crazy policy comes out, gets challenged, gets enjoined, goes up, national stay, and then the stays get whittled down, and then eventually they eke out some wins up at the Supreme Court. But I mean, we saw this song play over and over and over again over the last 4 years.
We're so much more awesomer than the anti-immigration side.
Right.
Our lawyers are better. And so hopefully that translates into more effective policy going in.
I think so. And I think that just, the morale boost that's going to happen. I don't know if you guys have talked to like immigration officers at your local CIS offices, but there's a palpable increase and a boost of morale, whereas so many of these officers are just shooting the breeze with them outside in the hall and whatnot. And they're just saying, you know what, we're just looking forward to being able to do our jobs again.
Well, how about, what's the morale on the ERO officers, the ICE officers?
Yeah, I'm not, I deliberately didn't say anything about that. I was just talking about USCIS.
Exactly.
The thin blue line flag is flying at half mast. We'll just say that.
Yeah.
It's a good point. And I did want to just mention, DACA is back. We wanted to have somebody who was involved in that case on the show, and we're working on doing that. Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I guess I don't have much to say about that. Well, let me ask one last question, and then we can wrap this up. So we talked about some potential legislative fixes and obviously, major uphill battle there. But what can people do to advocate for these types of executive actions that need to happen? Obviously, we talked about how there's a lot that needs to happen and that they should do it. But again, I'm just getting a lot of people who need direction. And what can regular, normal people do to try and make this happen?
Executive action is a great thing because it's quick and easy, generally when competently done. But I think the most important thing is if you're going to say one thing to your local representatives and senators is don't just hit the undo button. Make sure it goes forward. Leave it to the experts. Like, for example, it's pretty clear to me that Sessions sat down and reviewed all of the pro-immigrant decisions, of the Board of Immigration Appeals and decided to certify those cases to himself and did so in rapid succession. And Barr did the same thing. There's no reason why other, bad decisions of the Board of Immigration Appeals can be certified to a new attorney general. Now I'm getting, kind of into the weeds here, but that's an example of something that can and should be done. And the main point, again, is to make sure that it's not just a big Control Z and undoing everything that was done, even though that's going to take time and that's going to be complicated. And there's been a lot of systemic damage, I think, done to our system that might take years, to correct. That makes it all the more important to make sure that we don't just bring this back to zero, but keep pushing forward.
Right.
Hassan, something popped in my head about damage that will take a long time to undo. And one of those things might be some of the newer immigration judges that have recently taken the bench. And I know in Virginia, wasn't there a fellow there who's from FAIR or CIS or something?
Yes, there was. Yes, there was.
Is he
Yes,
still
there
there?
is.
Or?
It's Judge Matthew O'Brien, and I am just going to talk about it because I'm just going to talk about it.
I think he's great.
Yeah, right. Can't wait to appear.
He's doing a hell of a job. And, whatever you guys are about to say, I'm not even going to listen to it.
Right.
This is Stephen Robbins. My bar number is 111-361. Go ahead.
The problem here is that it's one thing for a judge to be sitting on the bench and then go work for an anti-immigrant organization. It's quite another for a judge to come from an anti-immigrant organization and with documented paper trail of disparaging comments against the very people who are going to appear before him and then sit down on the bench. And so, yeah, the former research director, and I use that term loosely because I consider the Federation for American Immigration Reform to not be a think tank, but a propaganda arm. So the quote unquote research director or chief propagandist of FAIR is now a sitting immigration judge in my home court here in Arlington, Virginia.
But has there been feedback about him yet? Or
so a couple of attorneys, we got together and put together a boilerplate motion for recusal that went through his entire record and explained why under the law, it doesn't matter what his conduct on the bench is, the appearance of impropriety and the fact that he's susceptible to extrajudicial forces, right? Which is one of the different ways that you can show that a recusal is appropriate. We have that in spades here because he worked for FAIR. It's one thing to make a big deal about his service prior to FAIR, but the fact that he came from an organization and, comments like calling all immigration lawyers ethnic grievance attorneys who will not hesitate to distort the truth when it suits their agenda.
I mean, that's on my business card, actually. So,
it's a good idea. Maybe I'll put that on my, it's like the dirty immigration lawyers, co-opted that term. Maybe that's the way to do it.
Grievance attorneys?
Well, I mean, has he ruled out any cases yet? Or
he has, and there's a number of attorneys that have used the motion for recusal and currently before the board. So we'll see what happens.
So how should the new administration deal with not only people like him, but other judges? I mean, because, I think they did a good job of getting a lot of these people, especially up at the board. Can something be done?
I think a good starting point is to stop taking advice from white supremacist groups and stop listening to them and taking their input.
Well, they're going to take that under advisement.
FAIR and tied to, VDARE and the fact that VDARE's email briefings were actually sent to immigration judges in their morning email briefings. That type of stuff has to stop. I mean, we can talk all we want about sitting down at the table and to negotiate, but if the other side of the table are essentially white supremacists, we're sitting at the wrong table. So what is it going to look like long term in terms of how we can better appoint? I think ultimately we're talking about creating a real judicial independence, obviously, in the immigration court system. You can't have sort of this commission system here or commissioner system here when the stakes are as high as they are with immigration. That might not have been the case 50, 60 years ago. Maybe it wasn't quite the same. But the fact that they've married immigration law to criminal law here and the same rights and rights of liberty and freedom from detention and being able to be with family and family reunification are basic human rights that are now impacted every single day in big ways by the immigration system, then we need to have a legal system that respects that and gives the corresponding constitutional safeguards. You can't just pretend that it's civil anymore. It's more than that. It's more than that, and I think that the protections should follow. If we provide those same protections to criminal defendants, then respondents deserve them too. So long term, that's what it looks like. But hey, a great place to start, stop talking to white nationalists.
That's pretty radical. I mean, right there.
Bold take.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if we're ready for...
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Really out there stuff. But Hassan Ahmad, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on, and we'll have you on again soon.
I had fun. Thanks, guys. Good to reconnect. And if I don't speak to you, happy holidays and happy new year.